So hello everyone, my name is Lisa O'Donnell and I'm a Senior Health Promotion Officer for Cancer Prevention for Dublin North City and County. On behalf of the HSE Health and Wellbeing team and Community Healthcare Organisation, Dublin North City and County and the National Cancer Prevention Programme, I would like to welcome you to our SunSmart webinar this evening. Playing and spending time outdoors is great for our children, but it's important that we take steps to protect their skin from the sun. So protecting children's skin from the sun reduces their risk of skin cancer later in life. The objectives of this evening's SunSmart webinar are to highlight the importance of sun protection behaviour for children, educate parents and guardians on steps to look after children's skin, and to highlight the importance of minimising overexposure to ultraviolet radiation and ultimately reduce children's lifetime risk of skin cancer. The webinar will last approximately 1 hour in total. Our guest speaker this evening is Dr. Behaviour Moriarty, Consultant Dermatologist from St Vincent's University Hospital. We are delighted to have Behaviour here with us this evening, who kindly agreed to share her knowledge with you all as our guest speaker for this webinar. Behaviour is going to give a 30-minute presentation on being sun-smart by protecting children's skin from the sun. Following that, we have Maria McHenry, who is a Cancer Prevention Officer with the National Cancer Prevention Programme, who will just give a brief overview of the National Skin Cancer Prevention Plan and direct you to where you can find further resources around being sun-smart. So at the end of the presentation, we'll also have 20 minutes for questions and answers. So at the top of your screen, you should be able to see a chat function. So if you have any questions at all, pop them in the chat function, and at the end, we'll have that time allocated for questions and answers, and we'll try and facilitate as much questions as possible. So without further ado, I'm going to hand you over to Behaviour, who's going to do our presentation. So I'm just going to share your presentation here now, Behaviour.
Thanks a million, and thanks for having me. Can you hear me, Lisa? You can?
Yes, I can hear you.
Perfect, yeah. Great. Super. Thanks a million. So my name is Behaviour Moriarty, and I am a dermatologist in Vincent's. And so what that means is that I'm sure most of you know this, so that means that I'm a doctor. I went to medical school in Cork, and then I spent the following 12 or probably nearly 14 years training in skin, so in dermatology specifically, and my area of interest is skin cancer. Now in St Vincent's, we don't currently see children as children, but I suppose what we do see a lot of is the previous children, now adults, who've run into trouble with too much UV radiation, which is of course what many of us who grew up in decades past are dealing with through, I suppose, a lack of knowledge and lack of a strategy in previous decades. And it's a really welcome and important strategy that has been put together between the Irish Cancer Society and HSE and Healthy Ireland in terms of the SunSmart campaign, because we know that this will be of huge benefit to our children. So just the next slide, Maria, if you don't mind. So the rates of cancer in Ireland are shown there on the graphic of the next slide, and you can see that we hear a lot about breast cancer, which is very important, and lung and bowel. But if you look at these numbers, actually the number of skin cancers in Ireland far exceeds the numbers of the other most frequent cancers. So these are the most frequent cancers: prostate, breast, lung, bowel, but skin far exceeds that. And I suppose we don't tend to hear as much about that as I suppose I might expect, given that I spend my time working in it. And that's partly because there hasn't until now been a strategy for it, partly because quite a number of the cancers that we see, patients don't always die from them, and so they may have mutilating surgery and their lives may be affected, but they may not die in the same way they should, or in the same sort of sad way that you hear for other cancers. But it is very much there in the background, and it's something there's a huge volume of in Ireland. And so why am I talking about this to a bunch of parents? Well, I'm a parent, and if we show the next slide, the question then is really, why do we have such high skin cancer rates? And I suppose there's a number of reasons. One is that in Ireland, believe it or not, we are genetically the fairest nation on earth. So in terms of a homogenous Irish population, our genes are the fairest. So we're fairer than the Icelanders, we're fairer than parts of Eastern Europe where you might think that the genetics would be fair. So we're more susceptible, and we effectively carry a genetic defect that makes us absolutely fantastic at developing skin cancer. The other thing is that we've been very late in Ireland to adopt sun protection behaviours. So, you know, I'm a child of the 80s and I was regularly sent out into the back garden with a bit of baby oil, a bit of factor 2 oil, because the theory was that we needed that to be healthy. And of course, that was the social norm until very recently. And one of the universal things that we'll hear when we tell someone that they have for the first time, if they have a skin cancer, they'll say, but I don't go out in the sun, doctor. And of course, a lot of us now are very careful in the sun, but a lot of us weren't protected through lack of information, that, you know, at the time. But we know that at the same time in the 80s, so in a part of Australia called Victoria, there was a sun protection campaign brought in. So this is what Marie is going to talk about later. This is brought in 1981. And those adults who were children during that campaign and who were protected from sun have a far lower risk of skin cancer than us or than other areas in Australia, and because they were protected from UV. So UV radiation is a class 1 carcinogen according to the WHO. So it's really very, it's something we don't think about a lot, but it really is very important to try and eliminate. We talk a lot about smoking and alcohol, but this is probably even more important. The other thing about Ireland is that, of course, we're also easily caught out. So we've had lovely weather these past few days, and I've been sending my kids out with a raincoat and sun cream. And of course, half the time you leave in the morning, you may not expect that by lunchtime your kid at break time they're going to be out in brilliant sun, and then it's raining again. So it's very easy to get caught out. And this SunSmart campaign is really important at combating that. And so mine, as I say, I always leave with sun cream and a raincoat. And so what can we do? So effectively, we need to be aware of something called the UV index, and we'll talk a little bit about this. So when the UV index is high, we need to be protecting our kids. I'm just going to show you a list of some of the more frequent skin cancers that we see, and so these are these are a number of the types of skin cancers that we see in the cancer clinic. And so I look after all of these and probably some others as well. But the absolute vast majority of skin cancers that we see are either melanoma, that's about 1,100-1,200 new cases a year in Ireland, or a keratinocyte, basal cell or squamous cell carcinoma, it's about 10,000 cases a year in Ireland. And these skin cancers, along with some of these, for example, Merkel, are at least 90% caused by UV. So what does that mean? That means that if we lived in the dark, we wouldn't have these, which nobody wants to do. And the other thing is that, but the more important message is 90% of these are preventable. So if you look at the 13,000 a year, you know, we could be running rates of 1,500 a year. And this is something that we could do through protecting our kids, most importantly, from skin cancer. And why? So if we look at the next slide, please, when our skin is exposed to sunlight, so it's when it's exposed to UV, so be that UV from sunlight, UV from a sunbed, which we won't even go into, the specific mutations occur. It's actually, sorry, Maria, it's the slide after this. Specific mutations occur in the skin, right? And so these are called pyrimidine dimers. So this is actually a direct effect. So the sunlight actually directly affects your DNA. So here's the photon of light and directly affects your photon of your skin. Now, I've put this in an image here of peeling sunburn, and I'm sure many of you have had peeling sunburn. I certainly know that I had as a kid peeling sunburn. But actually, what's really important to know is that you do not have to go red. You don't have to go pink. You don't have to have peeling sunburn to develop these pyrimidine dimers. So it's just the light exposure. So there's a group in London who did a very clever study on patients where they brought them to Egypt, and they looked at the DNA in their skin before and after sun exposure at what they called suberythemal. So they didn't go pink, they were just exposed to light, and they found that you will find these mutations in skin just from UV exposure. Okay, that all sounds a little dramatic, but your child doesn't need to be out getting, you know, blistering sunburn in order to pick up these pyrimidine dimers. And the thing about these pyrimidine dimers, they stay with you for life, right? So those patients that I'm seeing now who are in, you know, their 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, they may have picked up these mutations decades before in the back garden. And so these stay with you for life. And this forms the basis of why we talk about the particular importance of protecting children from sunlight over adults from sunlight. So we know, for example, that 3 sunburns in childhood doubles your child's risk of skin cancer. And 3 sunburns is very easy. It's very easy to achieve in our weather here. We know that sunburn before the age of 18 massively increases your risk of melanoma, and this is why. So you have these little mutations stay in your skin. As your cells divide over decades and decades, they allow cancers to develop, allow abnormal cells to develop. And then the next slide, then, please. So this is the Irish genetic profile. So this is a great magazine. So this is something called MC1R, and MC1R is a mutation in our genetic profile, and it codes for a type of melanin. And MC1R effectively codes for red hair. Okay, so if you have red hair, or if you see somebody with red hair, they have this mutation called MC1R. Now, the funny thing is that if we joke with the medical students saying that those of them with red hair have a mutation, but actually 3/4 of us in Ireland have this mutation. So you don't actually have to have red hair to have the mutation. So to be clear, if you have red hair, you have the mutation, but if you don't have red hair, it doesn't mean you don't have the mutation. There's still a 3 in 4 chance that you'll have it. And why does this matter? And so in the next slide, you'll see that it codes for the type of melanin. And there are 2 different types of melanin. So melanin is the pigment in your skin that makes your skin the color it is. So pheomelanin makes is yellow to red in color, and eumelanin is dark brown to black. And so in the Irish population, we have an overwhelming majority of pheomelanin in most of our patients. So in skin of color, as your skin is darker or black, you will have more eumelanin, and that's really protective against these UV mutations that I showed you 2 slides ago, and it's really protective against carcinogenesis or development of skin cancer. But for those of us, who are with fair skin, light hair, burn easily, we are likely to have this mutation if we're genetically Irish. As next slide, please. The other thing is that our attitudes to sun have kind of changed lately. And so, in my little world where I talk about skin cancer and I am surrounded by people with skin cancer or looking after people with skin cancer, I sort of believe that everybody knows that we should be careful in sunlight. And of course, then I come home and I chat to family and I realize that that's absolutely not the case. So there was a survey that the Irish Cancer Society ran last year that showed that 40% of men over 55 believe they're not at all at risk of skin cancer. And the interesting thing about this is that actually this is the group who are most at risk of skin cancer. So I think we've been late to kind of get on this bandwagon. I liken it a lot to the drink driving campaigns. So gosh, I'm dissing my own childhood a lot here, but when I was a child, my grandfather would go to the pub and he would have 2 pints and he would drive home, and that was okay. Whereas of course none of us would do that now. It's completely unacceptable. And sun exposure is a little bit like this. And so where getting a bit brown, getting the odd bit of redness, getting a bit of peeling was okay in the 80s, we're only now really beginning to realise that it's not remotely okay, and that we're putting ourselves and particularly our children at risk. And I think this is another reason contributing to why the skin cancer rates are so high, because it's going to take a couple of decades for this to manifest itself. And this brings me on to SunSmart, which is the next slide. And I know Maria is going to talk about this in detail, but it's really important for us to know the UV index. So the UV index is something that quantifies your risk of sunburn, and I'll describe that in a second. But without stealing Maria's thunder too much, it's really important to slip on clothing. So I know certainly in my kids, I have one who loves sun cream and others who don't. And so it can be a bit of a battle. And so I certainly get them to wear clothing where I can. And I'll talk to you a bit about the types of clothing. We use sun cream, which again we'll talk about. So slap on sunscreen. A wide brimmed hat is really important. And I talk about this a lot. So the Rory McIlroy style peaked cap is absolutely better than nothing, and that would protect your face, but it won't do anything for your ears or your back. So a hat. Seek shade, so staying out of this bright sunshine between 11 and 3. Sunglasses are things that many kids like to wear, but I suppose haven't been typically part of our clothing regime here in Ireland. And the most important thing of all of this is to not teach your children that getting a suntan is cool, because whatever is cool, whatever you manifest as the most important thing, your children will do this. And you know, I suppose for, you know, a lot of parenting I find is, you know, doing something that may harm yourself is one thing, but teaching your child to do something that may harm them is it's a tricky balance. But definitely, you know, tan is gone, tan from a bottle only. And so I'm just going to talk a little bit on the next slide about the UV index. So I don't exactly understand the metrics of the UV index. This is a very clever scale devised by a bunch of physicists, and it effectively quantifies how likely you are to burn on any given day. And it's to do with the ultraviolet power spectrum and the erythemal action spectrum. So that means how much light of a given wavelength, which for human skin is between 295 and 325 nanometers, is around on any given day. Sometimes that spectrum and the cloud cover. And then things that they look at to quantify this every day are where you are in the world, how high, what altitude you're at, our distance from the sun as a planet, how cloudy it is, and then the altitude and the stratospheric ozone. And this is something that you know, we've all become more aware of. So Met Éireann broadcast it, and you'll find it on most websites most days. Certainly, I know our intranet at the hospital broadcasts it every day. And really, if the UV index is going to be above 3, then you need to be protecting yourself. So I suppose this goes against that reduces the risk of just getting caught out. You know, I went for a walk, I didn't think it was going to be sunny, or I left for work in a t-shirt, didn't think it was going to be sunny, and came back with sunburn on my forearms. You know, really, for our kids, that's not good enough. And so from April to October, most days the UV index is going to be above 3. And if the UV index is going to be above 3, they need to be putting on sun cream and having a hat in their bag or a hat on their head before they leave the house. And then next slide. So to talk a bit then about exactly how to protect them, my apologies, I didn't change this to a photograph of adults, or children, but this is a photograph of people wearing appropriate photoprotection. Okay, so we're assuming that it's not midday, but the first thing to see is these people are sitting in the shade. Okay, when you're in the shade, you get 1/3 of the UV radiation that you get when you're not in the shade. So if you go and you stand out from the shade over here on the grass in the brightly lit part, you get 100% of the dose. If you're in the shade, you still get 1/3. And the reason for that is, of course, light travels in straight lines. So you're not sitting in the dark, you still are getting some UV. And that's why these people are wearing all of these protective measures in the shade. So you can see they're wearing a wide brimmed hat. And again, you know, it can be tricky to persuade my kids not to wear baseball caps, but really the ears and the back of the neck, you know, particularly for little boys, it's a really key area to watch out for, because that's often where we start seeing the skin cancers: backs of the ears, backs of the neck, side of the face. So hats are really important. Proper sunglasses with the CE marking protects your retinas. And then you'll see that these people have got long sleeve, long leg clothing. And I mean, they're not done up, you know, we can still see skin, but they're relatively covered. And then the other thing is that we hope they have some sun cream in that basket. So this is what protecting from the sun should look like. I'm going to pause and talk on the next slide a little bit about UPF clothing. So we all know about SPF and sun cream, but what's UPF? So there's clothing and there's clothing. So if you are wearing something white and linen and floaty and beautiful, if you hold that up to the sunlight and to the sun, and you can see the sun coming in through it, you're actually getting sunlight through that white linen clothing. So much as it looks gorgeous, it's not ideal for your kids heading off to the park for a couple of hours. So there's a rating which is UV protective. So it tells you how much UV is absorbed by the fabric. And what you can actually buy, you can buy this SunGuard stuff and spray it on your clothes, or you can actually buy clothing that are UPF, that have a UPF rating of 15 to 24 is good, 25 to 39 is very good, or what the ideal is, of course, for kids is excellent UPF, which is UPF 50 plus, and it blocks 97.5% of the UV rays. And these are, you know, that's really ideal. Now, I suppose people then say, well, where do you get it? Is it not expensive? And the answer is yes, it's definitely more expensive than, you know, a multi-pack of white t-shirts. But then, you know, I suppose what I do in my house is that I'll buy, say, 2 shirts inexpensively at the start of the year, and they last them the whole summer. You know, they don't need to be wearing just that. You know, if it's not, you know, they can have another shirt, they can have another t-shirt over it. You know, by the end of the summer, they're looking a bit tatty. They've probably had more wear than most other items, but they're not nearly as expensive as they would have been 5-10 years ago, or certainly in the 80s when they probably were entirely unaffordable. And most brands will now do UPF clothing. So if you have Google online, have a look on Amazon, have a look in TK Maxx, there are lots and lots of brands, common brands, that now have UPF clothing. And the same goes for hats on the next slide. So these are some of the brands that I've found do very good hats. So this particular pink one here is the one that my daughter wears, actually, and she loves it. And these are hats, as you can see, they have a bit of a wide brim, a string so that she doesn't lose it. This is the ideal hat. I know that's probably easier done on younger kids, but some of these hats, I mean, maybe 11-year-olds mightn't think he looks cool. I mean, I think he looks cool, but some of these hats are very, you know, they're stylish, they're nice, but the most important thing is that they have UPF within them, so they actually protect the top half of the face, the ears, the back of the neck, and they have a string, so they're not floating around their head. So this is a good set of hats. The next thing to talk about then is sun cream, and so I would direct you to in New Zealand there's a very good website called DermNet, and they have got two very useful leaflets. So if you're in doubt about sun cream, and I know some people are in doubt about sun cream, we talk about it as if it's a given, but there's two really useful leaflets, one about sunscreen agents and one about how to choose sunscreen. If you were to listen to the marketing about sun protection, you would believe that sun cream is the absolute only thing that we should do for kids, and of course it's not. And the reason that it's you know, you would believe that is that, of course, there's huge money made by the companies in terms of selling sun cream, and you know, we'll all know these very expensive sun creams that are marketed as being the one and only, and of course, like everything else, they're not. It is essential. Sun cream is essential, but it's not the only essential when it comes to protecting your kids' skin. So having clothing and hats and shade and sunglasses is probably even more important than the sun cream. So the sun cream we'd reserve for skin that can't be covered. So when my kids have got a long sleeve shirt on, I'll put sun cream on their faces, on their ears, on their necks, so the skin that isn't covered by clothing. So how do you choose one? The most important, these are the attributes of a cream, of a sun cream, that I find useful. So that it's a cream, so not a lotion or a milk or an oil that's the thickest. That it's a sorry, my husband heading out to another meeting, that it's an SPF, ideally 50 or above, and this refers to the UVB. Now, I know the advice is in terms of using a factor 30, so anywhere you'll read that, say to use factor 30 or above. The issue that I have with using a factor 30 is that none of us get the SPF on our skin that it says on the bottle, because the amount of sun cream that you have to put on your skin to get the SPF that's written on the bottle is really a lot. And so to cover your body in sun cream, you would need to use the entire sun cream bottle most of the time to get that SPF on your skin. So you need to use 2 grams per centimetre squared. And 2 grams per centimetre squared is a lot of sun cream. So most of us only get about half of the amount of sun cream on our skin that we should get on our skin. And so we don't really get the SPF that's written on the bottle. So I'd say if you're going to put anything on, why not just go for a 50 or above? The other question that people ask us is, you know, is there a difference? Is there a difference between 30, 50, 80, 100? And I didn't think there was, but actually there was a very clever study done in Whistler in the US, a half-face study where a team of students, who must have had great fun running this study, got a bunch of skiers, and they put factor 50 on one half of the face and they put factor 80 on the other half of the face, and they reapplied at lunchtime, and they measured the redness that these skiers got, and the skiers who were wearing a factor 80 had less redness than the skiers factor 80. So there does really seem to be a value in it, but that's only the UVB. The other thing that you need to look for in your sun cream is a UVA. So that will say 4 or 5 star UVA, or it might say broad spectrum. And this is just as important as the UVB. So these are the most important. This is your ideal sun cream: SPF 50, 4 or 5 star UVA. But the most important attribute of a sun cream, and I know this well in terms of kids, is that they'll actually wear it. So if you have the world's best sun cream, and you spend a fortune on it and your kid won't wear it, there's no point in you having spent that money. So you need to, you know, sometimes it can take a bit of you know, trying and testing to get a sun cream that they don't object to. You'll read quite a lot about chemical or physical sun creams. In the US, physical sun creams are really the only ones licensed, and so there's a lot of noise about them. There's zinc or titanium, or sometimes there's a newer titanium-like compound that's used as the filter, as the actual block that blocks the sun cream. They partly absorb the light and they partly reflect the light. There are some very good ones on the market, but don't believe all the hype, because it's just that the FDA have never licensed a chemical sun cream. There are lots of very good chemical sunscreens on the market, and these are some of the sun creams, right? And I've put a range of sun creams and a range of budgets on here to illustrate to you that there is not one good sun cream out there. There isn't one ideal one. So if you go out and you buy yourself a Chanel sun cream, that's lovely and I'm delighted. But I would find that if I bought something very expensive, I wouldn't use enough of it because I would spare it. La Roche-Posay is owned by L'Oreal, and they have a good lab and they do some very good kids sun creams. They can be a little bit yellow, though. I often find, so for school uniforms and things, that they might be a little bit they might just make the collars of them a little bit yellow. So just be aware of that with that one. Boots Sultan is absolutely excellent. It's a really good sun cream. It was the first sun cream to get a 5-star UVA rating, and it's very good. Now, it did give itself its 5-star UVA rating, but under good conditions. Lidl and Aldi in the summertime both do sun creams, and they're very, very good. They don't do them through the winter, though. So if you're going on holiday in the winter and you do sun cream, then Lidl and Aldi will usually not stock them. This brand, I have to say, I particularly like for 2 reasons. One, it's an excellent sun cream, and 2, it's very inexpensive. So these tubes are 100 grams of sun cream, and they're £4 sterling per tube, and that's a size that I put one in each of my kids, have them in their school bag. So it's enough sun cream that they can put on, and they're not too heavy for them to carry. The only hassle with this one is that you can only get it on amazon.co.uk, and so you won't walk into your local pharmacy and find it. So that's the only thing with that. And there's some other more expensive brands, also excellent, you know, also very good sun creams, but you know, just to illustrate, I suppose, that you don't need to buy the most expensive one. And then talking about sun creams for kids. So the next slide, I suppose sometimes people will say to me, well, you know, I've heard that sun cream might harm my kids. And that is a valid concern. Nobody has ever demonstrated that sun cream will harm anybody, I suppose, is the first thing to say. So there are 2 papers published, 2 scientific papers that brought up this question and addressed it to some degree. So there was a paper about 4 years ago in an American medical journal that showed that if you put sun cream on your full body and you do blood tests, you can find sun cream circulating in your blood. Now, nobody has ever proven that finding sun cream circulating in your blood does you any harm. So that's point 1. And the other thing is, you should never find yourself in a situation where your whole body is covered in sun cream. Okay, so the amount of sun cream that you need to be using is the back of your hands, your face, your ears, your neck. And although you still may get some absorption, you wouldn't expect levels that would do, even if it did do harm, that really could do any harm. That's the first thing. It does raise a concern, I suppose, and I'd always be a little bit cautious in terms of recommending sun cream on infants. So baby skin absorbs things much more easily than even older children, and so really for infants, they should be covered in the shade. So sun cream is just not probably studied enough. Probably wouldn't do any harm, but probably not studied enough. There was a study in the US showing that in some batches of some sun creams of American brands, that there was benzene, which is a chemical that sometimes associated with bladder cancer, in the sun creams. The level was below what you might expect to cause a cancer, and it was in specific sun creams in specific batches, and that's pretty much been addressed. But these are 2 things that you might see bandied about that, you know, are to be talked about and your attention drawn to, but that's the reason people can be cautious about them. And of course, we're always very cautious about anything we put in our kids, but this is the evidence for why. And then the next slide, please. So the other thing then is vitamin D. So people will say to me, look, that's great. You're talking on and on about patients with type 1 skin, so fair skin, fair hair, burn easily, and with a long history of that heritage, the long history of skin cancer. And, you know, that's not my situation. So, you know, I have type 6, I have black skin. You know, what about vitamin D in my child? And this is something to be aware of. So if you test even the palest of us Irish people in the midwinter, you will find that our vitamin D levels are low. Certainly when I worked in London in patients with skin of colour, so you know, Indian, Asian subcontinent black patients, quite often people would have very low vitamin Ds living in city situations, and we did see rickets in kids in central London, and not entirely infrequently. So if you believe that your child is at risk of low vitamin D, I would supplement them. And that is something to be aware of. So none of us want your child to have low vitamin D. So do supplement them if you're being very careful of their with sun protection, which you should be, and sometimes even if you're not. And the next slide, please. Just to rehash that after all that like spending time outdoors is really important for your kids. So I send my kids, the kids spent more time outdoors than indoors. So they're always off digging holes and muck, and it's so of course important, as we know, for their overall development. But it is really important to protect them from sun, because you know they won't. And you know 1/2 hour in my skin cancer clinic on a Friday morning would persuade you. UV exposure in childhood, you know, increases your risk of skin cancer more so than UV exposure in adulthood. So be careful. And we, as we said, 3 sunburns before the age of 20 doubles your risk of melanoma. We sort of all know this vaguely, but I suppose, you know, just to draw your attention to some of the work that Maria and those have done, you know, study, you know, the surveys have shown that 90% of, you know, 10 to 17-year-olds or teenagers have had sunburn, even now, which is disappointing, although it's easy to see how it happens. And then 3/4 had sunburn in the past year, and that's probably the more disappointing statistic. Now, I suppose the other thing to qualify that is that there's definitely a generational difference of opinion in terms of what sunburn is. So I'll have patients, you know, who are sort of in their 70s, 80s, and they'll have tanned, leathery skin, and then have bright red peeling sunburn, and they'll say, "Oh, I only got a bit of sun in the garden yesterday, doctor." And as against that, I'll have, you know, university students who had the very faintest pink once, and they'll come into clinic really concerned that they've had this sunburn. And I suppose our you know, idea of what sunburn is also changing over the years. So lastly, and I hope I haven't bored you all to tears, what should we look out for in our children? So this is freckling, okay? This is a lovely photograph that I pulled from the Irish Examiner from a couple of years ago. And these little freckles, we frequently see them across our children's skin. This is the skin, and of course all our kids have them, but this is a skin trying to protect itself. So this is an indication of too much sun. So what's happening here is this little fellow's very fair skin is trying to produce extra melanin, and that's that pigment that I talked about, to protect itself from the light. So this is from high intensity exposures. The intensity of the light that this little fellow was exposed to was higher than his skin could cope with. But that's no criticism of his parenting or his care or anything else, but that's what causes these little freckles. And freckles, as you know, come and go, and that's how we distinguish them from the next thing that I'm going to show you, which is moles. So on the next slide, I have a picture of a mole, and these are, if you look at your arms or your abdomen as you're sitting listening, these are the usually larger, usually darker, fixed lesions that you find in your skin, and these don't go. Okay, so some patients, about 1% of people are born with some of these of various sizes, but for most people, you start to develop them from kind of preschool age, so about 4 or 5. And you continue developing more of these at exposed, so face, dorsal hands, arms sites, but also covered sites until about the age of 35. Just for yourselves, after the age of 35, a new mole is something that probably should have brought to the attention of your GP, because we shouldn't really develop new moles after about that age. But your children will be developing moles. And if you look at this mole, you'll have to take my word for it that it's small, but this is a couple of millimeters. It's very regular and symmetrical, and this is the type of thing that you might see in your child, and this is perfectly normal. Okay, so it is normal to develop moles from the age of about 4 or 5 onwards. But then if we look at the next picture, this is a melanoma in the next picture. Now, these are incredibly uncommon in children. Okay, so when we're protecting our children from the sun, it's to protect them from developing these mostly in adulthood. We do see them in children occasionally, very occasionally, but often we wonder if that's a more genetic phenomenon rather than UV exposure in early childhood. So, if you develop one of these at 5, which is incredibly rare, it's not normally from UV exposure in the first 5 years of life. Often it may be a more genetic predisposition than that. But we do sometimes see late teenagers, early 20s developing melanoma, increasingly so, unfortunately, and that probably is related to UV exposure. But as you can see in this image, it's very different. Okay, so it's much larger. It's very asymmetric. It's got multiple different colors in it. So it's black here, it's brown in an area, it's purple. It's got these little white shiny parts. Parts of it have gone away or regressed. And the history that you'd always get with this is that it's changing. So it didn't look like this 4 weeks ago or 6 weeks ago or 8 weeks ago. And so this is what we call, so the E and ABCD criteria is for evolution, for changing. And it's changing asymmetrically and it's changing quickly. Whereas moles in our children change very slowly as the child grows. They might get a little bit bigger. So I'm just showing you that to alert you, but it's not something you would expect to see in a child. Almost more for yourselves. And so that brings me to the end of my chat. I hope I have brought up some interesting points and not bored you too much. And I'm very happy to take any questions if there are any.
Thanks very much, Blaheen. That was very informative. I've 3 young children myself at home, so I've picked up a few tips myself. And I suppose one of them will be to have a little bag of their sun cream and their glass and their hat ready to go, because it can be busy in the mornings when you're trying to get them out to school.
Oh yeah, yeah. I actually leave mine. It's up next to the front door, so that if we have forgotten, it's next to it's by the shoes, so they can't go without their shoes usually. And exactly. And at least they can get their sun cream on. But it's tricky. I mean, it's getting sun cream on kids. I find it's tricky. I have one who loves it and 2 who behave as if I'm sticking pins in their eyes. So it's it's a battle, all right.
Yeah. Thanks very much. I'm going to hand you over now to Maria McHenry, who is from the National Cancer Control Programme, and she's just going to give a little overview of the Skin Cancer Prevention Plan and also direct us to some resources. So I'll just hand you over to Maria now, and then we'll do questions and answers at the end. So do pop any questions you have into the chat box, and we can ask Blaheen at the end. Thank you.
Thanks, Lisa. Hope everyone can hear me and see my slides okay. Just trying to get this into presenter mode. Just to give you an overview, I suppose, of some of the work that we do. So I am a Cancer Prevention Officer with the HSE's National Cancer Control Programme, and I coordinate the implementation of the National Skin Cancer Prevention Plan. So I suppose children and adolescents and young people would be groups of people that we would specifically do awareness projects with and education with. So I suppose this is why we've done this webinar today, and we hope to do some other webinars down the line. But we are running for the second year, our Get SunSmart Children's Art Competition. So it's available for all primary school children. So depending on their age, they can either colour in one of our SunSmart images or draw their own picture, which shows how to be SunSmart. So there's 3 age categories, which you can see on the screen. The competition does actually finish up next Wednesday. So we have sent it around to schools for them to be involved, but I know it's also been shared regularly as well for parents if they want their kids to enter the competition. More information is on the website there at gov.ie/getsunsmart. And then the prizes would include a family day pass to Dublin Zoo and a family pass to OPW. And we do have some runner-up prizes as well. So it's just to kind of flag that competition that we're running at the moment. And then I know there might be some teachers as well who are on the webinar today, and just to let you know, we do have SunSmart lesson plans and activity sheets that we have developed for primary schools. So it will be part of the SPHE and it's under the Strand unit of safety and protection. So they are, I suppose, about teaching children about sun protection and raising awareness of the importance of protecting our skin from a young age. So we have all of our resources available, and we have linked to our website hsc.ie/sunsmart for more information on that. And then, as Bláithín did mention, we do have our annual SunSmart campaign, and that runs from the beginning of April right through to the end of September. You can look on any social media channels, and if you check SunSmart, the hashtag SunSmart, or on our website, we do have a wide range of information and resources, and we do kind of regular Q&As on Instagram, and we do webinars and different events right throughout the summer months. So if you do want to look up more, you can find out more on our website. And I suppose the whole premise of our SunSmart campaign is to raise awareness of the SunSmart 5 S's. And I know Bláithín had touched on them there, but they're slip, slop, slap, seek and slide. So the first one is to slip on clothing that covers your skin. Slap on sunscreen on exposed areas. So for adults, we would recommend factor 30 plus, and for children 50 plus. But we always get people, if they're like adults, especially if they are wearing SPF 50 plus, that's great. The higher the SPF, the better. And then slap on a wide brimmed hat. We know a lot of people will wear baseball type caps, but again, people often get burnt on the back of the neck, on the ears, on the face. So wearing a wide brimmed hat does give you that extra bit of coverage. Seek shade, so especially if outdoors in the middle of the day, so between 11 a.m. and 3 p.m. when UV rays are at their strongest, and that's particularly between the months of April to September. And the last one is to slide on sunglasses, so that's to protect your eyes from damage as well. And then I suppose we do always try to highlight not to deliberately try to get a suntan, to avoid getting sunburnt if possible, and to never use sunbeds. So I suppose that's what we're doing as part of our SunSmart campaign, to promote the SunSmart 5 S's right throughout from April to September. And we do have a wide range of resources available as well. So we have resources for kids. So we have some colouring in sheets, as well as a SunSmart Kids kit. We have fact sheets for parents. So that gives you information about protecting your children's skin. And we do have an FAQ document, which kind of covers the SunSmart 5 S's and goes into a little bit more detail about if you're looking at wide brimmed hats or sunscreen or sunglasses. And they are all available on our website and also on headpromotion.ie. So that's just a quick overview of some of the work that we're doing here. And as I said, if you want to find out more, we will be posting more information on our website for more events and resources that we're developing.
Thanks so much, Maria. That was great, very informative too. So we just have a couple of questions in the chat, so I'll just go through a few. If Bláithín, if you wouldn't mind answering, it would be great. Great. So the first one here is just around a lady who, she said her son has a couple of moles on his head, and she finds it's very hard for him to keep a cap on all day, especially when it's warm. He tends to take it off, or when he's in the pool. So she said that she's looked at a spray sun protection for children's hair and their heads, but she can't find a suitable one. She said, are these available, do you know? And she said the all factor 50 seem to be very creamy or greasy for the hair.
Yeah, no, it's right. Well, I suppose the first thing to reassure you is that it's not just the moles you're trying to cover. So it's really important, it's good to be covering the scalp, but even if your child has no moles in their scalp, it's the same risk. So if you look at an adult population where we tend to see melanoma, 1/3 of melanomas come from existing moles, so moles that were there 5 years ago. The other 2/3 come from previously normal skin. So you don't need to worry more about his scalp just because he has moles there than if he didn't have moles there. So that's the first thing to not worry. We'll sometimes see people and they, for example, put a plaster over moles on bodies and things. There's no, I mean, it's great to cover your skin, but there's no need to do that. So you don't need to worry extra. Yeah, keeping cats on kids is a nightmare. So yeah, I totally agree with that. And particularly at certain ages, I find that toddlers just won't keep them on. They'll choke themselves with the strings, and you have to pick your battles to some degree. And I suppose that goes back to my saying, yes, like the ideal sun cream is a creamy factor 50. But if all that you could get on your child while they go through a particular phase is, a different one, well, that's better than not, so don't, I think, as good as parenting is, or what is that the phrase, is what we're going for. So certainly that brand Ultras, they do have a spray that is that is, I think they certainly have a 30 spray. I'm not sure if they have a 50 spray. And my kids like it now. Of course, they destroy themselves. They wouldn't want to have their best clothes on because they spray it everywhere. But that they do have ones. As far as I know, La Roche-Posay have ones, and Boots have ones as well. So I would try. I mean, you know, as I say, you know, I try a range of them, and whatever your child will tolerate is the one to go for, you know, because having some of one they'll tolerate is better than none of the best ones sitting in your front hall, you know. So but certainly Boots, La Roche-Posay and that Altrist one have all got sprays. But yeah, I mean, go, you know, go for whatever you can get on. And you know, if you get the hat on for a while and sun cream on for a while and hat on again, you know, you've got to do what you can, I think is the thing.
Right, thanks, Blahin. And then the next question in is just in relation to a lady who says her toddler has eczema, which is aggravated every year in summertime when they use sun cream. And she says she's tried lots of brands like the La Roche-Posay and Mugu, etc. And she's just wondering, would you have any recommendations?
Yeah, well, there's two things. So first of all, if the eczema is active, absolutely everything is going to irritate it. So the first thing to try and do, and I mean, I realize how easy it is for me to sit in my front room and say, get your child's eczema under control. But the better control the eczema is, the easier it's going to be to do anything with it. And so, if, you know, making sure that you have a really good moisturizer regime. I mean, I don't mean to patronize, I'm sure you do all this, but making sure you have a good moisturizer regime. Sometimes if you know you're going to be coming into a time where the skin is going to flare, to make sure that you're using the strongest topical steroid that your doctor has recommended as you come into that phase, so the skin is in really good condition as you come into the summer weather. Because the sunlight, believe it or not, is not bad for eczema because it suppresses the immune system of the skin, but the heat really aggravates it. And I know what it's like. They won't sleep, and it's very difficult. There is a brand called Sun Sense. That's an Australian brand, and they have one called Sun Sensitive, and that can be quite well tolerated by adults and kids with eczema. But as I say, anything you put on skin that's inflamed is going to irritate, so it's difficult. The ones you've tried are very good, you know, but you could try the sun sensitive.
Thanks, Blahin. The next lady just said, really informative, thank you very much. She said her daughter has a freckle on her scalp. I tried to get her to wear a hat, but no, she doesn't always wear it in school. Is there suitable SPF for scalp? So I think you've kind of just answered that question. Yeah, and again, to just not to worry that, you know, you don't have to take more care of it than the other skin, the other surrounding skin. Great, thanks. Then the next person says, hi, thank you for an amazing lecture. And she just has a couple of questions. Do I need to apply sunscreen on the child's eyelids if they are not wearing sunglasses, is the first one. Did I understand it correctly that getting tanned is equal to getting sunburned? And then, sorry if I missed, but are physical sun creams safer than chemical sun creams? Yes, so yes, ideally if you're putting on a sun cream, you need to have it on everywhere. So we do see skin cancers, and it's tricky with kids, you know, it's the balance of not getting it in their eyes and them refusing to have any the next day. But actually one of the sites where we'll see skin cancers a lot is in around the eyelids. So this little part in the side of your nose, in around under the eyelids, the top of the eyelids. So it is really important, if you can get one that doesn't sting their eyes, to try and get it at that site. And you know, in school typically they're not going to wear sunglasses, whatever else they might wear for you. So if you can get it in, that would be ideal. The other question then about physical and chemical. So the jury's sort of out really on this. So the FDA have never approved chemical sun creams in the way that the European Medicines Agency has approved them. Now they go through a very strict approvals process in the EPMA, and certainly I would have confidence that the chemical sun creams that we use are safe. So I don't worry about using chemical sun creams on my kids. The FDA don't approve them, and I think that's where part of the controversy comes from. But if you are worried, there are good physical sunblocks. So zinc and titanium sunblocks are obtainable, and they're a little bit more expensive. So that brand Altruist uses a type of a titanium, and that's a less expensive one. And the reason I talk about the cost of sun cream is that the volume of sun cream that we all need to use in order to get the SPF that we need is so high. And
you just go through so much of it that it seems like, you know, when the less expensive ones are just as good, it seems like a waste of money and things that could be used in something, you know, something else. That Altruist brand does, not all of them, so most of their sun creams have a chemical compound that is a titanium base, that is a physical sun cream if you're worried. Now there are much more expensive ones, so Elta MD, for example, I've got a brilliant zinc stick. It's really very good, but it costs a fortune. It's about 50 quid and the stick is about this size. So it might be something that you might have in your summer bag. You certainly wouldn't get enough out of it to cover a child on a, you know, week-long holiday or anything. They're not, I mean, I like them, but they wouldn't be enough, certainly in my life. And then there was a third part to that question. What did I miss?
That was did I understand it correctly, that getting tanned is equal to getting sunburned?
Yeah, no, it is. And this is something that I didn't realize. My family didn't even know this. And it's funny. So if you expose your skin to light, you're picking up UV mutations is the bottom line. And so, you know, certainly I'm a child of the 80s, and the idea that you got a base tan and then you stop burning was something that we all grew up with. But in fact, you're still picking up the DNA mutations. And what's happening is that your skin is what's called hardening to the UVB light. So there's two forms of light that comes through with UV radiation, UVB and UVA. And UVB is what gives you the sunburn. So when you've been out in the sun for 20 minutes or 40 minutes an hour and you start feeling hot and burn, that's the UVB. So your skin hardens to that and you don't feel the burn, but you're still picking up the UV mutations, and the UVA is still getting through. And actually it's the UVA that all of these things that moving away from kids, but things like retinoids and, you know, the cosmetic companies will talk about, and the deep wrinkles in your face, they're all caused by UVA. They also cause cancer, but that's what all of these things are targeting. So although you harden to UVB, you don't harden to UVA at all. So I'm not suggesting we all stay indoors, by the way. You know, it's very important that we all get outdoors and get fresh air. It's just to protect your skin sensibly. So, but we'd never recommend, you know, deliberately exposing yourself to sunlight or or sunbathing per se.
Great, Blaine, thanks. Just a final question there. A lady said that she uses La Roche-Posay religiously, but their children are still got freckles after using it. Yeah. Would that mean that they're not applying enough?
Well, I mean, we're all going to get freckling. I suppose the thing is, as I said, we're genetically really fair, and the only way to completely prevent, you know, sunlight getting through is it genuinely would be to stay indoors in the dark, and like nobody wants that for your kids. So I mean, reapplying after 2 hours, reapplying after this, you're swimming, trying to use the other things, the hats, the sunglasses, will certainly reduce freckling. And that's what we're all aiming for. But you're still getting physical light through. So any of the sun creams that are on them, almost all the sun creams on the market, will also let some visible light through, and they'll also cause a little bit of pigmentation, particularly in already pigmented skin. Now, I don't think we need to be getting into the realms of protecting our kids. Certainly, white children don't need to be protected from visible light unless they have a lot of pigmentary issues to begin with. So it doesn't cause as much harm in white skin as, you know, UVB and UVA. But I mean, ideally, we should not be freckling. Our kids should not be freckling. But I suppose it's a balance of what we can achieve.
Okay, and just actually one final question, and then we'll have to leave it at that. It's just gone 8:30 there. Just somebody said SunSense Kids SPF 50+ children's sunscreen in transparent white. Would that be recommended for somebody who suffers with eczema?
Yeah, SunSense stuff's really good, and they have one I think that's called Sun Sensitive, and I could be wrong, but they have a specific one called, I think, Sun Sensitive, and that is well tolerated by kids with eczema. But you know, it's a very good sun cream. It's an Australian brand, and they were kind of a little bit ahead of the curve in terms of their both the formulation and the block. So it's good. It's a good brand. Not that I'm affiliated to any of them, by the way. They're just.
Oh, I know. Yeah. But it's good to get like some recommendations, because sometimes when you go into the pharmacy, you're bombarded by them all. And you know, me as a mother, I remember my first child going in, and they were recommending the most expensive one on the shelf, and you feel like you have to buy it. You know, like if you don't, that you're not protecting
kids, you wouldn't buy for yourself.
Yeah,
that's the thing.
Yeah.
And the other thing I would say is that, you know, like, I mean, again, to hark back to the 80s when like not all car brands went. So, you know, you knew that if someone had such a car, it wouldn't start in the morning when it was cold. Sun creams were a bit like that. And all of these sun brands, a lot of them used to make tanning oils 20, 30, 40 years ago. But now most of them are very good, really. You know, they go through pretty strict testing, you know, and most brands that are available are good. So if you find one that your child would wear, I would be more happy with that than worrying about it being the very best, you know.
Great. So just to let everybody know that we've recorded the webinar tonight and we will send it out to everybody over the next couple of days. I always find it's good to have things to look back on, because every time you look at presentations like this, you'll pick up something new that you remember. As Maria said, you'll find more information on being SunSmart on www.sunsmart.ie, and I've put the link into the chat box there for that. And also, if we've any teachers listening today, Maria mentioned about this, the SunSmart packs for school children, where we have lesson plans available. So if any of teachers are interested in that, working in CHO, Dublin, North City and County, you can email hwb.dncc@hsc.ie, and I've put that into the chat as well. And then finally, I just like, on behalf of the HSC Health and Wellbeing team in Dublin, North City and County and the National Cancer Control Programme, I'd like to thank Blaheen for giving up her time this evening for this very important and informative presentation, and to Maria too, who for her very informative presentation. And I wish everybody a great evening. Thanks very much for joining us this evening. Thank you.
Thanks so much for having me. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.